She texted during my dad's memorial service. "This is boring. I'm leaving to get drinks with Tom." I didn't reply. When she came home drunk at 2 a.m., her key didn't work. And there was a note. "Tom can deal with your boring ass now." My dad would have been proud of how I handled it. Hey, Reddit. My girlfriend disrespected my father's memorial service by texting me that it was boring and leaving to get drinks with her best friend, Tom. I didn't argue or make a scene. I just handled my business. When she came home drunk at 2 a.m., expecting to crawl into bed like nothing happened, she got a reality check instead. Here's how it went down. I, 32, male, lost my dad 3 weeks ago. Heart attack at 58, completely unexpected. He was working on his truck in the garage one Saturday morning. And by the time I found him that evening, it was too late. Dad was everything to me. Raised me alone after mom left when I was 12. Taught me everything I know about being a man, being responsible, and taking care of business. Dad wasn't just my father. He was my best friend, my mentor, and my moral compass. When other kids were getting in trouble or making stupid decisions, I had this voice in my head asking, what would Dad think? It kept me out of more trouble than I can count. He worked construction for 35 years, starting as a laborer and working his way up to foreman. Never complained about the long hours, the physical toll, or the difficult clients. Just showed up every day and did the work. I work as a project manager for a mid-sized construction company in Denver. Dad was the one who got me into construction. Started me out as his helper during summers in high school. Taught me how to read blueprints, manage crews, and handle difficult clients. Son, he'd say construction is not just about building things. It's about building relationships, building trust, and building a reputation. Do the work right, treat people fairly, and always finish what you start. Those weren't just words to him. They were the principles he lived by. Even when mom left because she needed to find herself. Translation, found a yoga instructor in Boulder. Dad never badmouthed her to me. Just picked up the slack, made sure I had everything I needed, and showed up to every game, every parent-teacher conference, and every milestone. The man sacrificed everything for me. Worked double shifts to pay for my college. Drove a beat-up truck for 15 years so I could have decent clothes and school supplies. Never once made me feel like a burden. Never once complained about having to be both parents. When I graduated college, he was the proudest man in that auditorium. When I got my first management job, he took me out for the most expensive steak dinner of his life. "You did it, son," he said that night. "Broke the cycle. You're going to have options." I never had. He was talking about education, about opportunities, but really he was talking about choices. Dad never had choices, just responsibilities and the determination to meet them. My girlfriend Tessa, 29, female, and I had been together for 18 months. Met her at a company barbecue. She worked in the marketing department for one of our subcontractors. Beautiful woman, always dressed perfectly, knew how to work a room, and was the kind of girl who could make small talk with anyone and leave them feeling charmed. Tessa was everything Dad wasn't. Polished, sophisticated, and comfortable in social situations. She wore designer clothes, drove a new car, and lived in a trendy apartment in LDO. I was attracted to her confidence, the way she commanded attention when she walked into a room. For a guy who'd grown up watching his dad work himself to the bone just to get by, there was something appealing about being with someone who made success look effortless. For the first year, things were solid. She seemed to understand my work and appreciated that I was building something. Dad liked her well enough, though he never said much one way or the other. Looking back, that should have been a red flag. Dad was usually pretty vocal about people he genuinely liked. With Tessa, he was always polite but reserved, like he was waiting for something to reveal itself. I remember one Sunday dinner at Dad's house. Maybe 8 months into dating Tessa. She'd spent most of the meal talking about her job, her coworkers, and some office drama that Dad clearly wasn't interested in. After she excused herself to take a phone call, Dad looked at me across his worn kitchen table. "She talks a lot about herself," he observed mildly. "She's just excited about work. She got a promotion last month." Dad nodded and went back to his coffee, but I caught him watching her through the kitchen window as she paced the backyard. An animated phone conversation went on for 20 minutes during what was supposed to be family time. The problem started about 6 months ago when Tom entered the picture. Tom was Tessa's old college friend who'd moved to Denver for work. Investment banker, drove a BMW, wore expensive suits, the whole package. Tessa insisted they were just friends and had always been platonic, but something about their dynamic fell off from day one. The first time I met Tom was at Tessa's birthday party. Guy had this entitled energy, talked over people, name-dropped constantly, and acted like every conversation was a networking opportunity. When Tessa introduced me as her boyfriend, Tom looked me up and down and said, "Construction, huh? Must be nice working with your hands." The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Tom had this way of making everything about him. During Tessa's birthday toast, he somehow managed to turn it into a story about their college days and some investment deal he'd closed. When people were talking about local restaurants, he'd interrupt with stories about places he'd eaten in New York or San Francisco. The guy couldn't let anyone else be the center of attention for 5 minutes. But Tessa didn't see it or chose not to. Tom became a constant presence. Work dinners that lasted until midnight. Weekend brunches I wasn't invited to. Constant texting about inside jokes from college. When I brought up my concerns, Tessa accused me of being insecure and controlling. "Tom's my oldest friend," she'd say. "You need to trust me. Besides, you work 60 hours a week. Am I supposed to sit home alone?" So, I backed off and focused on work. Tried to be the understanding boyfriend. Big mistake. The warning signs were all there. Late nights with client entertainment. New expensive jewelry she claimed was from work bonuses. Perfume I didn't recognize. Phone calls she'd take in another room. The way she'd light up when Tom's name appeared on her screen versus the obligatory smile she'd give me when I walked through the door. She started criticizing things that had never bothered her before. My apartment was too small and needed updating. My truck was embarrassing for someone in my position. Even my clothes weren't professional enough for the events she wanted to attend. Each criticism felt like a small cut, and they were adding up. Dad noticed the changes in her, too. Last time we all had dinner together, about a month before he died, he pulled me aside afterward. "Son, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life," he said, washing dishes in his methodical way. "But that girl's got one foot out the door already. The question is whether you're going to wait for her to tell you or figure it out yourself." I defended her, of course, and told him they were just friends, that she was going through a stressful time at work, and that maybe I was being paranoid. Dad just nodded and handed me a dish to dry. "You're a good man, Marcus. Sometimes good men have to learn the hard way that not everyone has the same heart they do." He paused, considering his words carefully. "Your mother used to do the same thing before she left. Started finding fault with everything. The house, the neighborhood, my job, my friends. Nothing was ever good enough anymore. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, fixed more things, and made more money, she'd be happy again. This is different, Dad." "Maybe," he said quietly. "But people show you who they are, son. When someone starts looking for reasons to be disappointed in you, they usually find them." Those were some of the last words he said to me about relationships. Wish I'd listened. When Dad died, Tessa seemed supportive at first. She took time off work to help with funeral arrangements, called family members, and handled logistics while I was in shock. For a moment, I thought maybe the crisis would bring us closer together, that seeing me at my most vulnerable would remind her why she'd fallen for me in the first place. But as the days passed, her impatience started showing. She'd sigh when I talked about Dad, change the subject when I shared memories, and act put out when I needed space to grieve. 3 days before the memorial service, she actually said, "I know you're sad, but you can't just mope around forever. Your dad wouldn't want that." Like, she knew what my dad would want. "He'd want you to move forward," she continued, scrolling through her phone while I sat at the kitchen table going through his personal effects. "He'd want you to focus on your career, on us, on building something positive." The casual dismissal of my grief was breathtaking. Dad had been gone for 2 weeks, and she was already tired of dealing with my moping. This from the woman who'd spent 3 days in bed when her favorite restaurant changed their menu. The memorial service was planned for Saturday afternoon at Dad's Union Hall. Nothing fancy. He wouldn't have wanted that. Just his friends, coworkers, family, and people whose lives he'd touched over the years. Dad had specifically requested no church service, just good food, good stories, and a chance for people to celebrate his life rather than mourn his death. I'd been planning this for 2 weeks, working with Dad's best friend, Charlie, to coordinate everything. We rented the hall, arranged catering from Dad's favorite barbecue joint, and set up a photo display showing different chapters of his life. The union guys were providing music, Dad's favorite classic rock and country songs that he'd hum while working. Charlie had been Dad's friend for over 20 years. They'd worked together on dozens of job sites and spent countless Sundays watching football and complaining about their backs. If Dad had a brother, it would have been Charlie. The man had driven 3 hours each way to help me plan this service. Refused to take gas money, insisting it was what family did for each other. Your old man would have loved this, Charlie told me the night before while we set up tables. Simple, honest, and nothing like him. That morning, Tessa spent an hour getting ready, complaining about having to wear black on a Saturday. She kept checking her phone and seemed distracted, like she had somewhere better to be. When I asked if she needed help with anything, she waved me off dismissively. You know this isn't a cocktail party, right? I said while adjusting my tie, the same tie Dad had bought me for my first job interview. I know what it is, Marcus. I'm being supportive, but her tone suggested otherwise. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like showing up to my father's memorial was some kind of charitable act she was performing. We arrived at the hall around 1 p.m. People were already gathering. Dad's crew from the construction company, neighbors from his street, guys from his bowling league, an extended family I hadn't seen in years. Everyone had stories about Dad helping them move, fixing their cars, and showing up when they needed him most. Mrs. Patterson from down the street told me about the winter Dad spent in her driveway every morning after her husband's stroke. Jimmy from Dad's crew talked about how Dad had loaned him money for his daughter's wedding and refused to let him pay interest. These weren't grand gestures, just the quiet kindness of a man who understood that we're all in this together. The service was perfect. Charlie gave a speech about Dad's work ethic and integrity, how he'd rather redo a job 3 times than deliver something he wasn't proud of. My Uncle Dave talked about Dad raising me alone and never missing a beat, never making me feel like I was missing out on anything by not having a mother around. Uncle Dave's speech hit me hard. He talked about visiting us when I was in high school, how Dad would be exhausted from work but still help me with homework every night. I'd ask him how he did it. Uncle Dave said, working 10 hours, then coming home to be both parents. He just shrugged and said, that boy's my whole world. Everything else is just details. Guys from Dad's crew shared funny stories about his terrible coffee and his habit of humming while he worked. How he'd slip 20s to the new guys who were struggling to make ends meet. How he'd stay late to help anyone who was behind on their work, never asking for anything in return. I spoke last, managing to get through my prepared remarks about the man who taught me everything about being decent. I talked about his patience, his principles, and the way he could fix anything with his hands and solve any problem with common sense. How he taught me that your word was your bond, that showing up was half the battle, and that treating people right was more important than getting ahead. During the whole thing, Tessa sat beside me scrolling through her phone. I noticed it during Charlie's speech. Her screen would light up. She'd read something, type back. During my uncle's remarks about Dad's sacrifice and dedication, during the slideshow of Dad's photos showing him at my baseball games, teaching me to drive, and helping me move into my first apartment. Even during the moment of silence, she was texting. People were watching. Dad's friends, my coworkers, and family members who'd known me since I was a kid. They could see my girlfriend treating my father's memorial like a boring obligation she couldn't wait to escape. The disrespect was visible, and it was reflecting on me. Charlie kept glancing at her during his speech, his expression growing more disapproving each time he caught her on her phone. Mrs. Patterson, who'd known me since I was in diapers, gave Tessa a look that could have melted steel. Even my teenage cousin put his phone away when he saw what was happening. I didn't say anything. This was Dad's day, and I wasn't going to create drama that would take away from celebrating his life. But inside, I was dying a little bit more with each buzz of her phone, each casual dismissal of the man who'd shaped everything good about me. The breaking point came at 3:30 p.m., right as we were transitioning from speeches to the social hour. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa, who was sitting right next to me. This is boring. I'm leaving to get drinks with Tom. He's been texting all afternoon about this new place downtown. Don't wait up. I read the message twice, making sure I understood correctly. During my dad's memorial service, while sitting next to me, while people were sharing stories about the man who raised me, she was planning her exit strategy to go party with Tom. The casual cruelty of it was stunning. Not just that she was leaving, but how she was doing it. The dismissive, this is boring about people honoring my father's memory. The complete lack of shame about abandoning me during one of the hardest days of my life. The brazen admission that she'd been texting Tom throughout the entire service. I looked at her. She was already gathering her purse, putting on her jacket, and preparing to leave. She leaned over and whispered, "I'll see you later. Tell people I wasn't feeling well." So, she wanted me to lie for her, too. Cover for her disrespectful exit with some face-saving excuse. Make her look like the victim of sudden illness instead of what she really was. A woman who couldn't be bothered to support her boyfriend through his father's memorial. I didn't reply to the text, didn't argue, and didn't make a scene. I just watched her walk out of my dad's memorial service to go get drunk with the guy she'd probably been sleeping with for months. Charlie noticed her leaving. "Everything okay, son?" "Yeah," I said, pocketing my phone. "Everything's fine." And in that moment, I meant it. Clarity hit me like a lightning bolt. Dad had been right. She'd had one foot out the door for months, maybe longer. Now she'd shown me exactly who she was when it mattered most, and I was finally ready to see it. The rest of the memorial was beautiful. Without Tessa's negative energy and constant phone checking, I could actually be present for the people who'd come to honor Dad. We shared stories, ate good food, and laughed at memories of Dad's stubbornness and terrible jokes. His spirit was all over that room. People kept coming up to me with memories I'd never heard. The time Dad had driven 4 hours to help a former coworker move just because the guy had no one else. How he'd paid for Christmas gifts for a family whose father had been laid off, never telling anyone it was him. The way he'd slip grocery store gift cards to elderly neighbors, always with some excuse about winning them in a raffle. Around 6 p.m., as we were cleaning up, Charlie pulled me aside. "Your girl seemed in a hurry to leave. She had other priorities," I said simply. Charlie, who'd been married to the same woman for 30 years, just nodded. He'd seen enough relationships come and go to recognize the signs. "Your dad saw things clearly, Marcus. Maybe it's time you did, too. I think I'm starting to be a good man. Your father didn't raise a fool." I drove home in Dad's old Ford pickup, the same truck he taught me to drive in, the one I'd inherited along with his toolbox and work boots. The silence felt peaceful instead of empty. For the first time in months, I wasn't making excuses for someone else's behavior or walking on eggshells to keep the peace. The truck still smelled like Dad's coffee, sawdust, and that Old Spice cologne he'd worn for as long as I could remember. His work gloves were still in the console, his favorite coffee mug in the cup holder. Driving it felt like having him with me one more time. At home, I looked around the apartment I shared with Tessa and started seeing it differently. This was my place. My name on the lease, my furniture, my security deposit. Tessa had moved in 8 months ago, contributing to groceries and utilities, but never signing anything official. Smart of me in retrospect. Some subconscious part of me had known not to entangle our lives too completely. I sat down to think. Tessa was out getting drunk with Tom while I processed losing the most important person in my life. She'd bailed on my dad's memorial service to party with her friend. The disrespect was staggering, but it was also illuminating. My phone buzzed around 8 p.m. Text from Tessa. "Having so much fun." Tom says, "Hi, don't wait up. LOL. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. While I was dealing with grief and the weight of honoring my father's memory, she was broadcasting her good time with another man. The exclamation points, the lull, the complete lack of awareness or shame. It was like she was rubbing salt in an open wound. I looked at that message for a long time, thinking about what Dad would do. He'd taught me that actions have consequences, that people tell you who they are through their choices, not their words. Tessa had made her choice. Time for me to make mine. I didn't respond. Instead, I started packing her stuff. Methodically, room by room, I boxed up everything that belonged to her. Clothes, makeup, those expensive handbags she'd accumulated over the months, shoes, and jewelry I'd given her for birthdays and anniversaries. I wasn't angry. I was just done. Each item I packed felt like removing a tumor, clearing space for something healthier to grow. In her nightstand drawer, I found things that confirmed what I already knew. Hotel receipts from dates when she'd claimed to be working late. A spare phone charger for an iPhone model she didn't own, probably Tom's, and a restaurant matchbook from the place they'd gone for their business dinner last week. Business dinner, my ass. Found her birth control pills, too. Hadn't seen those in a while. It made sense now. She told me she was switching to a different method for health reasons. Apparently, the new method was named Tom. The evidence was all there. Had been all there. waiting for me to stop making excuses and see reality. The late nights, the mysterious expenses, and the way she'd started pulling away physically and emotionally. I'd been too busy being the understanding boyfriend to notice my girlfriend had checked out of our relationship months ago. By 11 p.m., everything she owned was packed and stacked by the door. The apartment looked cleaner, more spacious, and more mine. I changed the locks and had called a 24-hour locksmith who came by around 10:30. The guy was professional, didn't ask questions, and just did the work. It cost me $200, but it was worth every penny. Then I sat down and wrote a note. Tessa, your things are in the hallway. Your key won't work anymore because I had the locks changed. You walked out on my father's memorial service to get drinks with Tom, so I'm assuming you'd rather be with him. Tom can deal with your boring ass now. Don't contact me, Marcus. I taped it to the outside of the door where she couldn't miss it. My phone kept buzzing with updates from her night out, pictures of cocktails, selfies with Tom, and videos of them at some trendy bar downtown. Each notification felt like a gift. More evidence that I was making the right decision. She was documenting her betrayal in real time. Too drunk or too careless to realize how damning it all looked. Around midnight, I took Dad's old dog tags out of the box of his personal effects I'd brought home from the memorial. Held them for a minute, thinking about his advice, his strength, and the way he'd handled Mom leaving without losing his dignity or his principles. I figured it out, Dad, I said to the empty apartment. Thanks for teaching me what self-respect looks like. I slept better that night than I had in months. The reckoning came at 2:17 a.m. I heard stumbling in the hallway, then keys jingling at the lock, confused fumbling as the key wouldn't turn, then pounding on the door. Marcus, open up. My keys are not working. She was clearly drunk, her voice slurred, and she was probably leaning against the door for support. I stayed in bed, listening to her increasingly frantic efforts to get inside. Part of me felt bad. She was drunk, alone, and probably scared. But then I remembered her sitting next to me, texting Tom during my father's memorial service, and the sympathy evaporated. Marcus, why isn't my key working? Open the door. More pounding. Then a pause as she probably found the note. What the hell is this? You can't just change the locks. I live here. That's when the real meltdown started. Screaming, crying, alternating between rage and self-pity. She was loud enough to wake the neighbors, but I didn't care. Let them see who she really was when the mask slipped. You're being crazy. It was just drinks. Tom is my friend. Sure, Tessa. Friends don't usually require birth control pills hidden in nightstand drawers. The yelling continued for about 20 minutes before she finally gave up. I heard her on the phone, probably calling Tom to come pick up her boxes and her drunk ass. Through the window, I watched him arrive in his BMW around 3 a.m., looking less than thrilled to be dealing with this situation. Tom kept looking up at my windows while they loaded her stuff, probably hoping I'd come down and take her back. Not happening, buddy. He'd gotten what he wanted. My girlfriend. Now he could deal with what came with her. They loaded her stuff into his car while she continued her dramatic performance on the sidewalk. Neighbors were looking out their windows now, witnessing the 3 a.m. breakdown of the woman who'd walked out on her boyfriend's father's memorial service. Tom kept glancing around nervously, clearly embarrassed by the spectacle. After they left, the building fell quiet. My phone exploded over the next few days. Tessa, Tom, Tessa's friends, and her sister, all with variations of the same message. I was being unreasonable. She'd made a mistake, but didn't deserve this. I was throwing away 18 months over one bad night. I should be more understanding of her grief response. Grief response. Right. The only thing she was grieving was the loss of her comfortable arrangement. I blocked them all and focused on work. I threw myself into a complex commercial project that required 14-hour days and complete concentration. My crew noticed the change in me. More focused, more decisive, less distracted. The fog of a bad relationship had lifted, and suddenly I could see everything clearly. Boss seems different, I heard one of the guys say during lunch break. More like his old man. Highest compliment I could receive. About a week later, Charlie called to check on me. Heard through the grapevine that Tessa moved out. Are you doing okay, son? Better than okay, I admitted. Dad was right about her. Charlie chuckled. Your old man could spot a fake from a mile away. Remember that contractor who tried to overcharge us on the Henderson job? Your dad knew something was off before we even saw the inflated invoices. He tried to warn me. Of course he did. But you had to learn it yourself. That's how it works. Can't protect your kids from every mistake. Just hope you've taught them how to recover from them. 2 weeks after the memorial service, I got an unexpected visitor. Tessa's mom, Carol, showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning. I'd always gotten along with her. She was nothing like her entitled daughter. Carol worked as a nurse and understood hard work and sacrifice in ways her daughter never had. "Marcus, I need to apologize," she said when I opened the door. "What Tessa did at your father's service was unforgivable. I raised her better than that." I invited her in for coffee. Carol looked around the apartment, noticing how different it looked without Tessa's clutter and drama. The place was cleaner, more organized, and more peaceful. "She told me you threw her out for no reason," Carol continued. "But her sister filled me in on what really happened. Walking out of a memorial service to go drinking. I'm ashamed of her." "I appreciate you saying that, Carol. Your father was a good man. He deserved better than what my daughter showed him that day. And you deserve better, too." We talked for an hour about Dad, about respect, and about how sometimes people show you who they really are when it matters most. Carol told me about Tessa's childhood, how she'd been spoiled by her father, and how she'd never really faced consequences for her actions. "I tried to teach her better," Carol said, "but her father always bailed her out, always made excuses. She never learned that the world doesn't revolve around her wants and needs." Carol hugged me goodbye and said something that stuck with me. "A man's character is revealed in how he handles loss and betrayal. Your father raised you right, Marcus. Don't let my daughter's poor choices make you bitter." I promised her I wouldn't. The aftermath played out predictably over the next month. Tessa and Tom's relationship imploded within 3 weeks. Turns out he was just looking for a hookup, not a girlfriend with emotional baggage and no place to live. She ended up moving back with her parents, posting vague social media updates about learning to love herself and growing from difficult experiences. She tried reaching out a few more times, emailing, showing up at job sites, and having friends text me on her behalf. The narrative she was spinning was that I'd overreacted, that she'd been processing grief differently, and that we could work through this if I wasn't so stubborn. The emails were masterpieces of manipulation. She'd start by acknowledging she'd made mistakes, but then spend paragraphs explaining why those mistakes were understandable. The stress of my grief, the pressure of the relationship, and Tom's confusing behavior, always someone else's fault, never her own. I never responded. Dad had taught me that actions have consequences, and some bridges can't be rebuilt once you burn them. Walking out on his memorial service wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. It was a choice that revealed her true priorities. 3 months later, I was in Dad's storage unit going through more of his belongings. Found a box of letters I'd never seen before, notes I'd written him over the years, report cards he'd saved, and pictures from Little League. At the bottom was an envelope marked for Marcus. "Open when you need guidance." Inside was a letter dated 2 years ago. "Son, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone and you're facing some kind of crossroads. I wrote this because I know you're going to face situations where people will test your character, your boundaries, and your self-respect. Remember that how people treat you during your worst moments tells you everything you need to know about them. When you're grieving, struggling, or vulnerable, pay attention to who shows up and who doesn't. Pay attention to who makes your pain about them and who quietly does what needs doing. You're a good man because you choose to be, not because it's easy. Sometimes being good means walking away from people who don't appreciate goodness. Sometimes it means standing alone rather than compromising your values. I'm proud of the man you've become. Trust your instincts, protect your peace, and never apologize for having standards. Your life is going to be good, son. Make sure you share it with people who deserve it. Love, Dad." I sat in that storage unit and cried like I hadn't since the day he died. Not just from grief, but from gratitude. Even in death, Dad was still teaching me, still guiding me, still believing in me. 6 months after the memorial service, I met Sarah at a job site. She was the architect on an office complex we were building, and she actually understood blueprints better than half my crew. Smart, funny, and treated everyone from the CEO to the newest laborer with the same respect. Sarah had this quiet confidence that reminded me of Dad. She didn't need to be the center of attention or prove how important she was. She just did good work, spoke thoughtfully, and made everyone around her better at their jobs. When I asked her out, she said yes without games or conditions. When I told her about losing Dad, she listened without trying to fix me or rush my grieving process. When I explained what happened with Tessa, she just nodded and said, "Some people show you who they are when life gets real. Good thing you were paying attention." Our first date was dinner at Dad's favorite steakhouse. I told her stories about him, showed her pictures, and shared memories without worrying about being too heavy or dwelling on the past. Sarah listened, asked questions, and treated his memory with the respect he deserved. "He sounds like he was an amazing father," she said over dessert. "He was. I just wish he could have met you." "Maybe he did," she said simply. "Maybe he helped you recognize the kind of person worth your time." That's when I knew I'd found someone special, someone who understood that the people we lose don't really leave us. They live on in the standards they taught us, the values they instilled, and the strength they showed us we had inside ourselves. A year later, Sarah and I were planning our wedding. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. Simple, honest, and exactly how Dad would have wanted it. Charlie agreed to walk me down the aisle since Dad couldn't be there. Sarah's parents, both teachers, reminded me of Dad and their quiet dignity and strong values. The night before the wedding, I went to Dad's grave for the first time since the funeral. He brought his favorite cigar and sat on the bench nearby. "Well, Dad, I figured it out," I said to his headstone. "It took me longer than it should have, but I learned to see what you saw. Found someone who deserves what I have to give." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves on the oak tree we'd planted near his grave. Maybe it was just weather, but it felt like approval. "Thanks for teaching me about self-respect. Thanks for showing me what real love looks like. And thanks for that letter." Perfect timing as usual. I left the cigar on his headstone and walked back to my truck. Tomorrow I was marrying a woman who'd showed up to every job site during the planning, who'd helped me cook dinner for Dad's old friends, and who'd listened to hours of stories about the man who raised me. Dad would have loved her. As I drove home, I thought about Tessa's text from that terrible day. "This is boring. I'm leaving to get drinks with Tom." The cruel dismissal of my father's memorial. The casual cruelty of choosing her affair over my grief. She'd called it boring. But Dad's life, his values, and his example, none of that was boring. Teaching your son to be a good man isn't boring. Showing up for 30 years isn't boring. Building something real, something lasting, that's the opposite of boring. That's everything that matters. I pulled into my driveway, the house Sarah and I had bought together, the place we'd build our life, and smiled, thinking about Dad's last piece of advice. Trust your instincts, protect your peace, and never apologize for having standards. Mission accomplished, old man. Mission accomplished.